All right, after a week off, welcome back, everyone. We are discussing today one of my favorite stories, the story of Deborah and Jael. And I'm going to let you all know now, I have thoughts and opinions, and I wrote a whole term paper on this section of chapters. So hold on to your hats. We have a lot to discuss because I think this is one of the more interesting judges we're going to come upon. But before we dive into all of that, I'm curious if you all have some initial thoughts on the scripture today. Is this a story you all were familiar with? Do you recognize the name, or is there something surprising today?
I only recognize the name Deborah, really. I didn't know all of this story.
No. It seems like what I thought was, I mean, it's interesting that Deborah was in this story, but it's the same thing. He got the Israelites keep, what do they call them? Yeah, the Israelites are always displeasing God, but it sounds, God seems very far away. It's kind of like this is what describing what it sounds like. It's always third person, but it just seems like he's not, or he or she or whatever. God is further away, and people are making assumptions. I think that they're just displeasing God, and they displease God a lot, and it's kind of hard to tell. Usually is they aren't killing enough people, but sometimes it's something else. They did this and not that, and I find that very, it's hard to read. I can't make sense of it. And of course, there are names that I've never seen before. There's a Barak, which is interesting.
So to give us a little bit of refresher, a little bit of like context for this story, we talked about this a little bit 2 weeks ago. The way that this section begins is going to be the way that many of the different judges come about in the book of Judges. Basically, there'll be a time of peace and a time of ruling, and then the text will say the ruler died, or the judge died, and then the people did what was bad in the eyes of the Lord, and then they were punished. That is the way that people theologized this back and forth. I have a professor that would argue, and that I would kind of argue is a better way to understand this, is that the best time to attack a neighboring tribe is when the ruler is dead, because there's no one to organize a response party. And so it's actually theology on top of just normal war tactics, that everyone's always fighting someone in this text. There's not really, unless you have a peace deal with the neighboring king, or like you can arrange specific relationships, but they're basically always at each other's throats, and the best time to attack someone is when their leader all of a sudden is not there. So that's kind of the historical answer for some of these things is, well, Ehud died, and since no one was organizing these tribes after Ehud, the neighbors thought, hey, let's go take their stuff. And so I find it a little bit more comprehensible thinking of it as not that the people were bad, but more so that this was a good time to attack anyways.
So it mostly has to do with picking fights so you can take people's stuff.
Yep. Everyone wants to expand their territory. But Gretchen, did you have a thought?
Okay.
Gretchen, check your mute.
First of all, my apologies for eating. I've already been to exercise and I needed to eat something when I got back. But here's this, along with the last story, are some of the most violent stories in the Bible. And again, if you have trouble getting kids to read the Bible, just, you want something really gruesome, You have
Mhm.
somebody's head being pounded into the ground with a
Mhm.
tent stake. So I find the judges goriness to be interesting and unknown to most people, that nobody sits around and talks about. I mean, they talk about Deborah, but they don't really talk about the woman who really did the work.
Mhm. I think that's a really interesting observation, and a good word to put with this book is gory. Where, like in other books, I mean, Exodus in some ways has a lot of violence in it, but it's not a visceral violence. It's kind of a plague comes and it destroys everything, but we don't get the nitty-gritty details. This time around, we're getting the nitty-gritty details. But circling back to one other thing you said, Sue, that I think is another really good observation is um, God feels more distant in these chapters. Where in like Genesis, God is walking around, God comes down and talks to Abraham, God is talking to Jacob in dreams. Like God feels very close. And the whole time with the Exodus, like God is involved with the people when they are in the wilderness wandering, and there's a very close relationship. And we're starting to see kind of the distance. And the question is it because the past has been kind of mythologized and like the story has been told in a way that makes God feel closer? And this is just kind of, we're getting closer to what we would consider like more historical, and therefore God feels more distant? Or is their relationship more distant now that they are less reliant on God for their daily needs? Because they're farming, they're sheep herding, they're not in that same reliant situation of God needs to provide manna and quail or we're going to die. So there's a question of how we could understand this feeling of distance, but I think the observation of God feels a little bit more distant is accurate. And I think good to keep in mind. So,
Well, he's not being carried around in the tabernacle and,
mhm,
anymore. And he's not, the
mhm,
people, the leaders are not going into the tabernacle and talking to him.
mhm.
Or,
Well,
I don't know. Him or her.
theoretically, Deborah has a direct connection to God somehow.
Oh.
We're not given the details of it, but Deborah is kind of seen as the conduit through which God is gonna speak.
Okay, I missed that. I was just so
So,
distracted by the other stuff and not knowing who was who.
well, let's actually walk through and kind of sort out who's who. And when it comes to I know there's some odd pronunciations or some words or some names here we're maybe not familiar with. I will help us the best I can. The thing that I would like to have a discussion after we get through the story is this a story that is empowering for women, or is this story more disempowering than empowering? Because I think that is actually not a straightforward question and an interesting one. Because as I brought up many times, there's not many named women in the Bible. And in this story, we get two named women. We have Deborah, and then the other woman, her name is commonly anglicized as Jael. In the Hebrew, there's a pause in it that is Jael, or Jael. The L at the end is likely a reference to God. I don't know what the prefix of her name means. But so there's many ways to pronounce her name, but we'll get to her. So let's jump into the text itself. So like we're going to see the pattern at the beginning of chapter 4. The Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, i.e. their leader passed away and they got attacked. And so they have the punishment is the Lord sells them into the hand of the king Jabin of the Canaanites, and who reside in Hazor. This is going to be in the northern part of what we would modern day understand as Israel. This is more in like the northern Galilee, Jordan region. So we're talking about the upper part here. It's less desert, more like Northern California winery country. That's kind of the terrain we're talking about in the north. So, and the commander of his army is Sisera, which is notably not a Semitic name. So they don't know who the Sisera character is, but that Sisera will be the main antagonist because he is the leader of the armies. The Israelites cry out for help to the Lord because they're basically enslaved. And the King Jabin and Sisera are noted because they oppress, but they also have chariots of iron. This story takes place in the Iron Age. And so the distinction that's being made, this is not a fully metal chariot. Most of the chariot pieces are made of wood, but the distinction here is the joints, like the axle and the things holding the chariots together are metal, which means they are much sturdier than like a fully wooden chariot. So this is they are more technologically advanced than the Israelites. That's the cue that we are being given, where the Israelites mostly just have foot soldiers. The Canaanites that they're up against are not only in chariots, they're in chariots that have like metal smith parts, and they have horses to draw those chariots, and horses are extremely expensive. So this is meant to make the Canaanites seem much more advanced, technologically much wealthier because they can afford chariots and horses. So that's the setup. The Israelites are the underdogs in this situation. And so any thoughts on the setup here about what they're up against with the chariots and the kings oppressing them in the area? Yeah, go for it.
Well, I think we're seeing tribalism in this too. I thought that it's always a certain tribe that goes up against people. In this case, you have Zebulun and Naphtali. I don't know. I just thought that was again, we're looking at similar to city-states or chieftains or nomadic tribes with their own power and not a unified group of people.
Right. I mean, that is a great distinction at this time because there are empires at this point. Like Egypt is an empire that conquers places. We have the Hittites who are a bit farther away that have a Hittite empire. We will see other empires grow. This is not empire building. This is small tribes going at each other and 100% tribalism. My tribe doesn't like your tribe. That tribe is banded together with that other tribe. So this is a few tribes coming together, attacking their neighbor, and then the neighbor kind of trying to coalesce their thing to push back. So 100% definition of tribalism. But Clay, did you have a thought? I saw your hand too.
Just nothing profound, just the fact that if I had realized it, from those 7 words, he had 900 chariots of iron, you were able to tell us a lot of information just from knowing that. And mine gives me a little bit in the bottom that says that the Hebrews were unfamiliar with working with iron, but just all that implies just by that very short phrase just kind of got to me. Yeah,
I mean, so
neat.
It's interesting looking forwards and backwards. Like thinking today, how would you talk about like a society that is more advanced than someone else? Like it's if you're talking to someone, or actually different way to talk about this, if you're thinking about science fiction from different decades, it's interesting when like the scientific thing is you push a physical button and something happens, and there's like lights on the ship screen, and like you see people hitting buttons. And it's fascinating going back and watching like the Alien movies with Sigourney Weaver, because their technology, what seems so advanced is they could hit physical buttons. And at a certain point, hitting physical buttons looks old to us now. It looks dated. And then we got like touch screens in our science fiction where you basically had people walking around with iPads, but that we have that now. And so now to seem technologically advanced, there's like holograms that pop up, and like touching and like doing things with holograms looks fancy. But looking back, we think everything else looks dated. And so it's interesting trying to figure out what sounded fancy and rich and technologically advanced when all of that seems pretty darn basic to us. And so it's kind of drawing out like, where in history are they, and what kind of small signifiers are they gonna give? Because like, if we today read in a text that someone has a Rolex, it's not just talking about the fact that like this character has a watch. There's a lot of things packed into what that watch means.
Rolex was I think of Rolex as you had all your names and phone numbers. And
Oh,
contacts.
Rolodex.
Rolodex, yeah, no.
That was my picture too, Clay. I was thinking,
Yeah, I think I had the
who
wrong
has a
picture.
Rolodex anymore?
Wrong picture.
Right. So, I mean, but like technology is interesting. And what is technologically advanced for them? Having a metal axle on the chariot. That is the height of technology. So, and having 900 chariots with metal axles.
Wheels.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, Helen, check your mute.
It kind of reminds me of good authors who write a lot of information in a very short phrase, like Shakespeare. And you know, it's kind of interesting to watch how this person wrote about it.
Yeah. Anyways, so we're gonna keep moving on. Even though, I mean, Chariots of Iron, I find interesting. At any rate, in verse 4, we get introduced to Deborah, who her name is put first and foremost. She is Deborah. Then we're getting a description. She is named first. Second, we hear that she's a prophetess, which means she talks directly with God. She's not allowed in the priesthood. And so this is where we kind of break off a different category of people. Women can't be priests. She's not in the tabernacle. We don't actually get her lineage, so we don't even know if she was a man, if she could be a priest. So if you're a woman who talks to God, or a person who is not in the priesthood who talks to God, you kind of get put in the prophetess category. And so she is a prophetess, which means she has a direct link with God. And then third, she is a wife. So she has her name, her job, then her marital status, and we get who she is married to. And then last of all, we get the fact that she is judging Israel. This may be in a judicial sense, and this may be in a militaristic sense, or it may be both. But she is functionally the leader of the Israelite society. So once again, we have a lot of information packed into one sentence here. So what kind of image are you getting of Deborah just in that one sentence?
She also has an office there of Deborah's palm tree.
Uh-huh. So that is also a signifier. Wise people tended to speak under trees because it's shady and it's like a public setting. So often rabbis taught under fig trees are another image that is used. And so basically, that's a great way to think about it, Joanne, though. This is her office, is the palm tree, and she is accessible to everyone.
She's mature. I mean, from the description, I think of her as in her 40s or maybe early 50s. She's not mature like I'm mature, but and obviously this kind of who's taking care of the kids, really? If she's out there doing this, really, she should be taking care of her family.
I mean, so what's interesting is she's often when women have children, they will also be called mother. She is later on called Mother of Israel. So she's her, if she has kid, we don't know if she had children or not. We're told she is a wife, but if she is a mother, she is a mother of the country, which that is a lofty title to give to someone.
I think she must have had a lot of ability and intellect, because to rise to that position, being a woman, I mean, we haven't heard of a woman quite like Deborah before. I mean, the women are subjugated to another role entirely. And I think somewhere along the line, she had to have showed that she had unusual ability, especially if she could talk to God. That, of course, raised her up too.
Yeah. Yeah, Clay?
And she can send for and summon someone. I mean, that's you're pretty important if you could do that.
Right. But
And they
Helen,
come, and they come.
And
You,
they-
a lot of us can send for
they come.
somebody, but they come. He just shows up. Here I am.
uh-huh. But you are spot on, Helen. We have not seen a woman like this in the entirety of our scripture. Like, we have Sarah, but Sarah kind of has to manipulate everyone around her to get any power of authority because she has to do what Abraham says. Same with the other matriarchs in Genesis. They can't actually exert their power outright. We've seen like Moses's wife Zipporah, who does make some calls and decisions, but she's only in a few verses of the Bible. We have Miriam, who is alongside Moses in a ruler, but she's put in her place, and she is always said to be his sister. She's not really ever a ruler in her own right. And this is a society where women are property. And it's interesting that she, like, it would almost be a different case if she was unmarried, like we get with the Rahab, who took the Israelite spies in. She's not married, so she had a bit more authority to work with. But notably, she had that kind of maneuverability in the scripture because she was a woman of ill repute. This is a married woman, so technically she is her husband's property, and yet she far outranks him, and the text is okay with this. And so this is a very unusual case where she has a lot of power, a lot of authority in a culture that is very patriarchal by definition. So she is a woman to contend with. And so when the Israelites come to her for judgment, basically asking for help, like, we're being oppressed, what are we gonna do? She doesn't tell the whole crowd what to do. Instead, she summons Barak. And this is where the kind of the textual origin of like Barack Obama's name is a biblical Old Testament name. So that this name is kind of a Semitic name throughout the Hebrew and Arabic world, but this is kind of where we see its origins, which is kind of cool. Anyway, so she summons Barak, and to him she has the prophetic formula, thus says the Lord. This is kind of the introduction of any prophet. They will start by saying, thus says the Lord, and then what follows next is what God has said. So we're given the military instructions, go to the position on Mount Tabor, 10,000 people, and you will take Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, and it will happen by Wadi Kishon, and his chariots and his troops go, and Deborah basically just sends him with marching orders. His response is, I'm going to do this, but only if you come with me. So why? Her instructions are fairly straightforward. She seems to be a woman of authority. Why does he want her with him? Did you all consider why he makes this request?
probably because he knows that she can communicate with God. And if there's any messages from God, she would be the one to receive them. So he'd want her along to tell him if there's any change in the plan, anything that needs to happen.
So in a way that is, it's like assurance, like, okay, I want to follow what God tells me to do. And the best way to do that is take the prophet with me. Other thoughts? Yeah, Gretchen?
Well, of course, I have the other thought that Barack wants to take Deborah with him in case things don't go well. He doesn't want to be the sole leader of a catastrophe. He wants somebody around that he can, well, maybe it was her fault, or I don't think it's for the glory, frankly. I think it's to kind of help him, maybe in one way to help. It is a way to help him with God talking, but it's also a way, well, if things don't go, I've got this person that
To
can
blame.
take the blame.
All right, Gary, what's your thought?
I thought he may be kind of testing the sincerity of this
Oh,
by taking another man's wife with him.
Ooh.
interesting.
It's a character test of her. How strong and committed are you, and the fact that she has a commitment to a husband.
Mm-hmm. The other question is, does she trust her own plan?
Yeah.
The thought is, like, if Deborah is unwilling to go, does she think this is a bad plan and she wants someone else to go? And so if it's an iffy plan and she's not willing to go with him, then he's like, maybe this is a bad decision. No matter what, this is probably in some ways an insurance policy that either, like, if something goes wrong, God can tell me how to maneuver. If something goes really wrong, I have my scapegoat, I can blame her. If something goes wrong, if we know out of the gate that something is not right, she's not gonna go. So if is she trying to get me killed? If she comes, she's not trying to get me killed. And let's see how invested she is. Is she willing to put her status in question as like a wife and a leader? Is she gonna put the leadership above her own like married life? So all of this is kind of testing the waters of like, Deborah, how sure are you about this plan? But the question is Barack justified in his seeming hesitant? Okay, backtrack one thing. The one thing I didn't hear from you all is Barack is scared and doesn't want to go. Is he afraid, or do you think he's just trying to buy himself an insurance policy on this one? Yeah, Clay?
I hadn't thought about that. I had just thought right away about the fact that he was challenging her in a way, by saying that. It was like, is that something you do to a judge? I don't know.
So it's in a way questioning her authority. And I think that's another valid way. Like, once again, this is the first woman leader we've seen. And it kind of seems like I'm not sure if I want to take commands from a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to question your authority a little bit, and you're going to come along with me because I don't know if this woman's giving me good advice. What does this woman know about war?
Mm-hmm.
But it's reassuring when she responds quickly that, I'll go with you.
Oh, yeah.
It's reassuring that she must know what she's doing.
Yeah, she does not doubt her own ability, but she comes back and her response to Barak is, I'm going to come with you, but because you doubted the Lord, it's not that you doubted me, it's that you doubted God. You are not going to get the victory or the glory. Like, we're going to go, everything's going to be fine, but you're not going to get anything from this. So what do you think of this response of hers? Like, what expectations does it set up, and kind of what are you expecting at this point when she's like, yeah, you're not going to get the glory, a woman is?
Well, I think it puts a challenge to him again, to whether or not he wants to do that. I mean, that is a pretty a risky thing. That's not good for your machismo to have a woman is going to do it. I mean, I think it's kind of. Are you sure you want to do this? Because you're not going to get the glory. Fair warning.
Yeah, as we read it, it seems straightforward from this to this to this to this, but it's very complicated.
It's almost a put down.
How so, Helen?
He might have been a little insulted, maybe, but was willing to go ahead with it anyway.
I mean, in a way, it puts the shoe on the other foot here, where you're not sure if you want to take instructions from a woman, or like you're not sure if you want to put your life on the line here. But guess what? If you want the good of your people, you're going to have to do this and not get the glory now because you were worried about image. So are you more worried about your image, or are you worried about the good of the people? It is entirely a chastisement.
It's not that Deborah might just be a rabbit's foot.
What was that?
Deborah is Deborah is a rabbit's foot, just I don't know. I can't tell whether she's not fighting.
She may be there as like more of a military general. I mean, because she is making these military calls, Barak is supposed to be the military general. By asking her to come along, he's kind of asking her to take the general point of view.
Okay.
So she's going to be in the war tent. She's probably not going to be out there with a sword, but she will be supervising this, is the implication.
So it looks like in less than a paragraph, they just wipe the other people out with their iron chariots and kill them all.
So this basically, like the fighting part is very short.
Yes.
So they go out, and sure enough, or we get it first. Let's see, step by step. Barak goes to the places she tells him. He summons 10,000 warriors. These are not people who are advanced in fighting. This is like, these are farmers, and they have retooled their farm implements into war implements. And given like at this time, there's enough fighting that everyone would have like a cursory understanding of how to use a farm implement to kill someone. The most common tool at this point in time, especially when you are retooling farm implements, are spears. So you take off the scythe and you stick on a pointy thing on the end, and there you have a spear, and all you have to do is poke someone. And so that's often what peasantry used for fighting. And so 10,000 people basically armed with spears that are, farmers are tough people, but you can easily teach them to fight when they're fighting with spears, at any rate. So they summon the 10,000 people. So it's 10,000 foot soldiers against 9,000 chariots, which the odds are not good on that, because the chariot gives you extra protection and you move a lot faster. Yeah, Clay?
think it's 900.
Oh, 900.
I
Thank
thought,
you.
wow, that's not even at all.
But still, like, that's still not a good ratio, because you both have a horse that can trample someone and you have someone that can just like hit you as they're riding by. Chariots are what you want in this kind of battle.
What is with that little tiny paragraph that doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything?
Is that
now
verse
Hebron-
11?
Yeah, the Heber the Kenite, and what's that all about?
This is
There's-
setting up the next part. So
Okay.
Heber the Kenite is
Oh, yes.
explaining
Oh, that's
why
right.
this little group of people, who is technically part of the Israelites, is friendly with Sisera, which is Jael, who is going to be the main actor of the next part. She is part of the Kenite tribe, so it explains why Sisera
Okay.
is willing to go to them. All
Thank
right,
you.
so yeah, so we have that little exposition. These two groups of people are friendly. So just know that, and then we jump back into the battle. So where they are fighting is basically a hilly region that goes into a grassy plain area, a flat area. This is in and around Megiddo, which we've talked about it in a recent sermon. Har Megiddo, which is the mountain of Megiddo, there's a plain right next to it that is anglicized into Armageddon. It's a location and it's where battles took place. And so they are fighting basically at Megiddo because it's a flat place. What the Israelites want to do is they want to come off the highlands into this plain region so they have height advantage. Basically, you always want to be on the high ground. So this battle strategy is putting the Israelites on the high ground and the chariots on the low ground. We aren't given full details of what's happening, so we aren't given the full details of what happens. We get more of that in the poem that comes next. So we'll get to that in a moment. But basically, Sisera sends his troops out. Deborah is the one who calls the day of the Lord and sends the troops out. So this is where, once again, she's acting as a general. So she declares it. Barak leads the people out. And it is said that verse 15, the Lord threw Sisera and all of his chariots into a panic before Barak. And the panic implies that there is a natural event, some kind of weather phenomenon that happens that makes the battle tilted in the favor of the Israelites. If we put our finger here and flip over to the poem is considered older, to the point of they don't actually know what some of this Hebrew means. It is archaic to the point that we lost definitions of some of the words. So they think that the poem itself was actually written pretty soon after this battle happens, where the story is written much later. So the poem there's a question of, is it more accurate because it's closer to the event, or is it actually like glorified and extra details added to kind of pad the incident? But what?
Well, I was going to say, and even this chariots going into the panic, if we remember the crossing of the Red Sea, that they got mucked in and got panicked, and that was it. So
Right.
It's kind of back to that image in our head if we're thinking. And Clay has something.
Exactly. Yeah, Clay?
Well, my book does not use the word, my Bible doesn't use the word panicked.
Oh, what does it say?
It says the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army before Barak at the edge of the sword. That doesn't indicate panic to me.
Interesting.
So what, yeah.
I would have to look up the Hebrew to know what's being translated directly here, and that'll take more time than we have. So,
Yeah.
there's probably a reason, but if we're flipping over to the poem for a little extra details, if you go to verse 19, 20, and 20, 19, 20, and 21, we get a little bit of extra detail of what might actually have happened. It
Yes.
says, the kings came and fought. They fought the kings of Canaan at Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo. They got no spoils of silver. The stars fought from heaven. From the courses they fought they fought against Sisera. A torrent, Kishon, swept them away. An onrushing torrent, the torrent of Kishon, march on my soul with might. What is implied here is there was some kind of rain or flooding that happened.
Mhm.
And if you're marching versus if you're trying to roll wheels, which does better or which does worse in a flood?
Yeah, those wheels will get bogged down.
Right. And this is, Gretchen, you're spot on. This is in some ways a callback to the crossing of the sea. This is one of the things that God does, is God uses nature to kind of help or hurt, one side or the other. And so clogging the wheels of a chariot is considered an act of God. And if you're a chariot rider who's all of a sudden can't ride in a chariot, you're going to be panicked. So I think that I think that's why you can either get rerouted, as in the chariots had to turn course, or they were panicky because their wheels aren't turning. So from that point, Barak and his foot soldiers are pursuing the chariots. So the foot soldiers now have the advantage. And Sisera realizes this, and what he does is he ditches the chariot and runs in a different direction on foot. And this is why the verses in 11 are important. He runs towards the Kenites. And there's they are semi-nomadic because they're in tents. And there's a woman at the opening of a tent, and she's like, "Hi, Sisera, come in here." And she invites him in. She gives him milk. She gives him curds with honey. She lays him down for a nap. She covers him with it's a rug, but it's a blanket.
Hey.
She hides him, and she promises to watch at the edge of the tent and promise that she won't tell anyone is in her tent. So pausing there, what do you think of this situation of like, oh, come on in, Sisera, I'll make you nice and warm. I'll hide you.
Well, she certainly came up with getting him kind of so he doesn't expect it. You know, he was totally safe, and then she goes after him. It's really grisly.
Oh yeah, it is.
You know, that
and
tent
the
peg excuse me, go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say that tent peg and mallet certainly shocked me at that moment.
The thing is, she has gone against her husband's she's gone against the community, not just her husband, but the entire, they're the Kenites. She's one of them. And so he could easily understand, well, I'm going to get some safeness here. It's a little bit of a picture of a Rahab, kind of, almost in this.
Oh yeah, she betrays her people. She is a traitor. She is defied. I mean, we know she is married, so you get her taking action in a few ways. She has made the call that the tide is turning and Sisera's going down. Like she makes a military call there. It is her wisdom that says these people are gonna lose. She invites a man that is not her husband into her tent. And then she defies her husband's allegiances by killing him. The notes in my text are saying that this is not a big deal for women to use tent pegs. Women were responsible for setting up the tents. So driving a tent peg in is like, that's women's work. Men do other things. It is women's work to do that. So it is well within her normal realm to do this. But there's a few things that are really interesting that are meant to humiliate Sisera here. So number one, he is invited in and tricked by a woman. He is outwitted. Number two, he's meant to sound emasculated by saying like, woman, make sure there's nobody coming after me. Like, my text says, if anyone asks, is there anyone here, say no. And the Hebrew genders that actually. So it's like, if a man comes and asks if anyone's here, tell them no. So he is looking for protection from a woman, which is meant to be humiliating. And then he is killed by an implement that is coded female. It's not that he dies by the hand of a sword. He is killed. It would be equivalent of like a man going into a kitchen and being killed by a frying pan. Since like women are traditionally the ones who cook, he is killed by something that is feminized. And so he is meant to be humiliated here. And then the last part, let's see, where is it? Or is it in the other one? Oh, no, it is in it's in the poem. Verse 27, it says, he sank, he fell, he lay at her feet he sank, at her feet he sank, he fell, where he sank, he fell there dead. Reminder, Hebrew poetry loves repetition. So all of this is the height of fanciness for them. Feet are often a euphemism for other things. So falling at her feet has a sexual connotation, and the notes are saying this is actually supposed to be a reversal of war, because one of the plunders of war is women, and specifically soldiers assaulting the women that they are conquering. And this is meant to be like Jael conquering Sisera in a reverse fashion. So he is falling at her feet or on her lap, which is further meant to humiliate him, saying he has been taken like a woman has. So Sisera is supposed to be humiliated by all of this female context. But Gretchen, you look like you're about to say something.
Well, that's the reason I also said that there's a sense of her also emulating Rahab. I mean, we don't have any, it's not said, but Rahab was a prostitute. This woman invited him in, come and look at my feet, have a little time together.
Yeah, Clay?
Well, when you mentioned verse 11, that it's put there to let us know, but it says the tent was pitched as far away as possible. So Sisera's running. My feeling at first was he's desperate, and this tent is kind of all by itself out there, wherever in the middle of nowhere. And he's just desperate to go in, and then she's not going to know he's coming. So you're right. She just takes this into her own hands once the opportunity is there. But I saw it as desperation that he ends up in that tent, which is so far away from everything else.
Yeah. I mean, that's an accurate read too, that like, yeah, he's desperate, but I think it's notable that he doesn't ask to come in. She invites him in. So desperation meets opportunity, but she is proactive. And that's the part that's important to see, that she is proactive and he at this point is very reactive. So the text sets it up as if Deborah is the one who is going to take the glory in this case. And instead, it's this random woman. So at the point that Barak comes to town and says, okay, we saw Sisera come in here. Where did he go? And Jael like pulls her tent back and says, he's in here. Look, He's already dead. I took care of him for you. Look at that. So what do you think of kind of how the story wraps up, that like he's eventually pursued by Barack, who has been told he's not going to get the glory, but he kind of expects Deborah to get it, but like, nope, a woman drove a peg through his head. So what do you think of this whole story? I mean, or after this point, chapter 5, we include it because it's an elaboration of the story. We get some more details. Like we said, the poem, the song is much older. And they have included it here. We get a few extra details, few things go differently. But I don't think it fundamentally changes the story. But it does show that this story is popular right off the bat, basically. Like Deborah and Jael are like, they're sung about almost immediately. They think this story is awesome. And I'm curious what you all think about this. Helen, check your mute again.
Off when there's something loud here. Yeah, I think it was pretty great too. I kind of think it was great that a woman was able to take over and be powerful in a situation where it's very unusual.
Mm-hmm.
I was glad for her. Glad for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it probably made a difference as far as their culture is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that Barack had here he was obviously uncomfortable being led by a woman. He asked that she travel with him into battle, and then as it turns out, when he's after the battle's about over, but he's chasing down the leader, this woman comes out, says, I have the guy you're looking for in my tent. He's dead. So it's like the women have really made impact is a small word, but on Barack during this whole story.
Mm-hmm. So Deborah's often lauded as one of the big feminist figures in the Bible. Or Deborah and Jael, but Deborah being the like leader, Jael being the actor in this story. And I return to the question that I said I was going to ask at the beginning. Is this empowering for women, or is there something else going on here that maybe makes it not as empowering as it looks at first glance?
Well, God does it all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's amazing how quickly Jael decides what to do. I mean, it's just like, she's so smart. All of a sudden she thinks, oh, I'll invite him in. I'll kill him. But in the end, of course, it's really all God. I think your question is very interesting because I've always thought of it as a kind of oh, look at what those women did.
Mm-hmm.
But was it to their glory, or was it to God's glory, or did it come back to the men in the end anyway? The glory. I love this one line in the poem on the mother of Sisera gazing out the window. And when is my son? When is he coming back? Why? Oh, it's because he's so busy taking all of the stuff. I mean, it's just kind of a little poignant. It's on verses 28 through 30. It's little from a completely different viewpoint of the rest of the poem, and then you turn and the mother of Sisera is waiting for him, and that's just not his wife, but the mother is waiting for him.
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah, I have a thought, this is, of course, present day thinking, pasted on thousands of years ago, but if these women are being like men, is that the best role model for women?
yeah.
That, yeah, that's kind of that, I think the colloquial term is like pantsuit feminism was the like, if we're going to be in a man's world, we need to emulate the men. And that's kind of where these two fall, is the women are not winning the situation by, or they're kind of entering that man's realm and doing it instead of the men. And I think that's an interesting observation.
And they're doing it not as like men would do it. They're doing it like women would do it. Your image
Oh, yeah,
of her
especially,
taking the frying pan after.
yeah. Mhm.
So
Yeah.
why I have my gripes with this story. Now, don't get me wrong. I love this story. This is, I mean, I think it's just so interesting in all the weird details that it's not that I want to emulate the story, but I find it so interesting. But why I always pause with it is the women at every point in the story are meant to humiliate men for being weak.
Yeah.
That it's not celebrating femininity in like the good things of being a woman and like the ways we do things. It is meant to humiliate men and call them lower than women. It's like, oh, we're second-class citizens, but Sisera got taken out by a second-class citizen because he wanted his mommy. It has that kind of tone. And even like when Deborah addresses Barak, she's like, oh, you can't go to battle without your mommy? Well, because you wanted your mommy, a woman's gonna win. And it has that condescension to it where it's not that like men and women have qualities that make them succeed in battle or like have military strategies that are equally valid. The women in this story, their sole design is to humiliate men by them losing to women. And
They really aren't using men as a role model. They're doing something that, well, their agenda is different. It's not trying to. But why do they want to humiliate men? Well, it's the enemy. Okay, it's the enemy. But they would be perfectly happy humiliating men that weren't the enemy.
It's one of those that the implication is if Barak had just done what Deborah said, he would have won the battle and a man would have had his proper place. But because he doubted, it's like, oh, look, the women were more faithful than you men. Men, you need to step up and be strong men in your place. And I don't know if that's a helpful perspective.
I think there's a certain sense too, they did it all by cunning. And that is often, leveled against women, that they did it in a way that was a little bit odd, not quite above board.
Well,
yeah, Helen?
Probably in response to the years and decades and centuries that they had been treated that way. It's a chance to get even.
Yeah, Gary, did you have a thought?
Well, it seems that it's first time that from a cultural standpoint that the men need to have start looking at the women differently and of what they're capable of, and as a plus or a minus, just be aware and No, this is the first time that this kind of thing came up where the women as a second level have gone up to a higher level with their actions. So, I think that when you approach a woman now, you're gonna think a little bit differently about it. Just don't look past them.
Yeah.
Mm.
Mhm. So I don't think it's fair to, I mean, Gary, what you're making me think is, like, it's not fair to put our modern sensibilities back on a text, because this is at a point where they've had a very patriarchal culture for a long time, where literally patriarchs ruled and women are objects to be owned and sold. And so they're having to deal with a woman in power kind of for the first time and figure it out. The question is, we've had a lot of time since then to kind of do some of this thinking, and we've had a lot of great thinkers considering some of these questions. And I think this might, rather than us trying to put our morality back on a text, sometimes the text needs to be a mirror for what we expect today and what we expect of women leaders. And I still today see some of this of, like, women in power being used to shame men. And that's one where it's like, okay, they were trying to make sense of it here, but is that appropriate to do today? Or can we see leaders for their strengths and their weaknesses on their own merit, and see that, like, people aren't going to lead the same way, but that doesn't mean that one is meant to shame the other. And so I bring it up just as kind of a cultural thing, because I mean, thinking about, like, my own job, women are taking over the roles of being pastors, and a lot of churches are having to learn what it means to have a female leader for the first time. And they're kind of going through some of these questions. Now, Northminster, you all were graced by Gretchen very early on in our trajectory. And so it's like, we have already asked these questions, and kind of come to an understanding of this, but there's other places where women are still not as represented in certain fields and certain industries, and people are having to ask the question of, does women entering this field make men weak, or
Right.
can they just stand on their own footing? So I think the question is still valid, and it kind of just gives us a way to think about it, is thinking
But
about Deborah and Jael.
it makes men weak if they are intimidated, but in reality, it shouldn't have any effect at all. They should
Well,
be just another person coming in who's good at what they do. And if you think of women as a threat, then you're going to be intimidated. But you don't have to
So-
think of a threat.
one example that I can pull out, and once again, I don't care about your political preferences, but you can see this argument or this rhetoric being leveled on the Democrats' pick for vice president. They're calling him Tampon Tim because he is second to a woman. And it's one of those that, like, he is being presented as being weak because he is the number 2 to Kamala Harris. And I find that is where we still see this kind of rhetoric at play. Is he considered weak because the woman is considered strong?
Yeah, that's just really mean to do that, to pick something that he did that was good, which to have female products in the girls' restrooms and all the restrooms in schools or public buildings.
I just pull it out as an example that we still see women being used to shame men for being weak.
Of course, women I was thinking about how often that men rape women. This is maybe turning the tables. It's just, that certainly humiliates. That's a horrible thing to do. It is a, yeah.
Yeah, Helen?
I kind of think it's up to the some individuals and some groups of people. I think there are groups of people and organizations that still think that way of intimidating men. But I think a lot of other groups are not that way at all. It's also an individualistic kind of an opinion. But I think there are groups that feel that way, but not all groups do. I
No,
think there are a lot of groups that consider him to be our vice president selection to be a very good person for the job at the time.
yeah.
It's more observation of a dynamic that I see, that pointing it out just so we're aware of kind of what's going on. And it's interesting when there's connection here of like the dynamics that are going on here, we still see the echoes of it. So
What I'm wondering is if Shapiro had been picked, would they have done that to him?
I have
So-
no idea.
Oh.
At any rate, we
Well-
are well past our time. Oh yeah, Gary.
I think that this is, you got, the end of the discussion here got awful superficial. Because
Okay.
it's just the emotions are going on, and when people are unqualified for that, that's a whole new game. But so in my lifetime, I've associated with women that I almost forgot they were women. They were so capable, and they were team players, and they were competent, that the issue doesn't even come up. I think it's only when people are not knowledgeable about what's going on, or they just gets into a superficial, like, name calling, and it doesn't
Yeah.
have to do with real character communication between two individuals.
So where the rubber hits the road, and I hear what you're saying, Gary, and I still think there is actually there is an important dynamic that we do need to, sometimes if you don't see things for like the categories that people are in, you don't notice patterns. And what we've seen is when women become the dominant, or like take over a field, they become the predominant people in a field, we see that comparative wages go down. That like when women became teachers, or became teaching became a feminine profession, you can track and see that the price or the wages for teachers collectively went down. And there's other things where healthcare is another one. When women started being when different areas of healthcare became dominated by women, their wages went down. And so it's one of those that it seems there are important dynamics to point out. And there's some questions if other industries are having this happen, where it is important to look at gender because there are gender dynamics happening. And so name calling, I think, is sometimes an easy way to see some of these dynamics, but there are important dynamics of how we value people at play. So that's just my defense of why I brought it up. Like I said,
Okay.
we are way over time, and I have a few things I need to get to. So can I pray us out for today?
Sure.
All right. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, I give you thanks today that you call all people of all different backgrounds, of all different experiences, of all different genders, of all different races and ethnicities. You call people across the world and across time to stand up and do what is needed. Sometimes when we feel called, we are nervous. We want assurance that what we're going to do isn't silly, that isn't going to lead us astray. And we give you thanks for the people who encourage us along the way, who act like Deborah to us, who prop us up and help us along and assure us that you are with us. We give you thanks for the people like Jael, who are able to make snap decisions and do what is needed, even when it seems brash or when it seems sudden. And we give you thanks for all the people who have guided us and led us with their wisdom and their grace that ultimately leads us back to you and your wisdom and your grace that guides us day in and day out. So I ask that you be with this group. We send up special prayers for Mary Ellen, that she may continue on her healing journey, and that you may be with her so she never feels alone, and be with her doctors as they find treatments and as she adjusts to life going forward. So we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
All
you.
right, take care. See you next week.